You're watching Executive Functioning TV. Coming up next on Leadership Brains, executive functioning and time perception on your team. What it actually is, why it is not a character flaw, what it costs your organization, and what you can do as a leader to support your team this week. I'm Kristina Proctor, your host from Leadership Brains. Leadership Brains is sponsored by Neurodivergent Ventures, where your unique mind is your greatest asset. Coming up next on Leadership Brains, we're getting into something I promised you in a previous episode: time blindness. This is an EF or executive functioning challenge that shows up across your team every single day, whether you acknowledge it or not. We're going to go into the data, we're going to do a live demo, and we're going to talk tools, all today on Leadership Brains. At the end, we're going to dive into real questions from real people, trying to figure out why time keeps disappearing on them. There's also something I want to address that's really serious at the beginning of this episode. So it's a specific term that we use a lot in the ADHD community and in the executive functioning community as well. I want to get into why I want to be very thoughtful right at the beginning of this episode. So join me for episode 4 of Leadership Brains. I want to start off this episode by addressing something before we go anywhere else. There's a term that gets used a lot in the ADHD and executive functioning community, and it's called time blindness. Dr. Russell Barkley popularized this, and for a lot of people, it was the genuine clarifying language that they needed to define or describe an experience that they have of not perceiving time in the same way as other people. They have sometimes what it can feel like are two time zones, now versus not now. Disability community advocates have raised incredibly legitimate concerns about this, about using and popularizing the term blindness and using it as a metaphor in our language. You could look at it, you could also look at tone deaf, blind spots. Those are phrases that are borrowing the idea of a sensory disability and using it to describe a failure or a limitation in somebody else. When you're a person who is actually blind, hearing your experience as shorthand for somebody else's deficit can be very jarring, and it's worth paying attention to. The National Federation of the Blind and Disability Advocates have written about this. Dr. Lydia XZ Brown has written extensively about commandeering disability language and using it in everyday language to describe experiences. If you are wanting to dive in deeper into this conversation, into this topic, I encourage you to. And you can do that by searching up ableist metaphors in everyday language. It's a nuanced conversation and worth the research. At the end of the day, what matters for this conversation we're going to have is the mechanism, not the label. So let's get into it. Here's what I need you to hear before anything else in this episode. Whatever we call it, time blindness, time perception differences, temporal processing challenges, it is absolutely not laziness. It is not disrespect. It is not poor planning. It is not a character flaw. It is not a character flaw. In you, it is a neurological reality. It is the certain way that brains like ADHD brains, especially, but also brains under stress, grief, burnout, experience time. And those brains do process time differently. And let's be frank, our workplaces were not built around how different people experience time. It's not an excuse. This is a mechanism. And understanding how that mechanism works is the first step in building systems that work for your teams. I want to tell you what time perception differences have looked like in my actual life, because the clinical explanation is useful and lived experience is what makes this land for most people. I have ADHD. I have talked about this on the show and all over my social media. This is a particular aspect of how my brain works and is one of the most persistent and honestly humbling parts of my, quite frankly, daily experience. Here is a very simple example. I talked about this before in the context of phone automations, but I want to give you the full picture of it now. I would pick up my phone to maybe check the weather. That was the intention. Entirely legitimate, genuinely useful, and it takes roughly 22 seconds. And then I would look up. And 25 minutes later have passed, and I've been about on 4 different apps and still have not looked at the weather. Not because I have had a bad plan, but because my brain experience of time while I was scrolling or reading an article was completely disconnected from actual time passing. And I was in the now. The task felt continuous and present. What I did not have was the sense that time was elapsing around me and kept on going. That is a time perception difference, not irresponsibility, not a failure of willpower. The brain legitimately did not register the passage of time as something real and relevant until the damage was done. And that's the part that really sucks. So here's another one. I have been in a deep work session before, and it was actually productive, genuinely focused, making real progress. And I was super excited and completely missed a client call. It was not fun. Not because I forgot it was there. It was on my calendar. I looked up at my calendar in the morning, but by 11:30 a.m., the noon call was still in the not now time zone. It did not become now until my phone started ringing and I had the moment of complete and physical shock. If you know that shock, you definitely know. It's a full body, "Oh, no," and it launches into your nervous system, and it put my nervous system into fight or flight for about 1 second, and then you know exactly what I'm talking about. I bet you do. Most people have experienced this at some point in their career or in their personal life, and here's the thing about that shock that I want you to understand. It's not just embarrassing. It's physiologically activating. Your cortisol spikes, your nervous system floods, your emotional regulation takes a gut punch. And now you're going into a client call already dysregulated, which is not how you want to go into a conversation. And now that is the downstream cost of one instance of time perception difference. And if it happens repeatedly, if your schedule is structured in a way that keeps producing these shock moments, the cumulative effect on your nervous system, your executive functioning, and your confidence is significant. Your self trust evaporates. You don't trust yourself, so you implement all sorts of structures that are unsustainable. Trust me, I know. I say all of this because I want to be clear about something. When I talk about this at a team level, time blindness that is, and we're going to go there next, I am not talking about something that other people have and you need to manage. I'm talking about something that is likely affecting you too, whether or not you've even named it. I'm talking about building systems that reduce the shock moments overall for everybody because the shock is expensive for you, for your team, and for your organization. Okay, here's what time perception differences look like inside of a team because they show up in ways that almost never get named correctly. Leaders see the behavior, they label it, they try to address the label, and then they never get to the mechanism. So here are 3 of the most common ways I see this operating in teams and what is actually happening underneath each one. Number 1, late meetings. Your team meeting starts at 10. By 10:07, 2 people have not arrived. You send a message. They show up at 10:12, apologizing. You have had this conversation many times before. What most leaders assume is disrespect, poor prioritization, not valuing the meeting. What is actually happening in a significant number of cases, the meeting before that one ran over by 4 minutes, and the person with time perception differences could not accurately estimate that getting from that meeting to the next one, whether it's walking down the hall, closing a screen, wrapping a thought, sending just one message, was going to take 6 minutes. It feels like it is 2. So they did not start moving until it felt urgent, and then it was already 10:05. The meeting that runs a little bit over is not the problem on its own. The problem is the schedule with no buffer between commitments combined with brains that cannot accurately estimate transition time. That is a system problem, not a people problem. Number 2, the deadline that almost made it. The deadline was Friday at noon. The deliverable came in at 2 p.m., or it came in Thursday night in a state that clearly needed another 2 hours of work. What most leaders assume: poor planning, waiting until the last minute, or not caring about quality. What is actually happening? The person did not feel the Wednesday urgency because Friday was still not now. By Thursday morning, it shifted into now. They worked intensely. Actually, they probably worked really hard, and their brain's estimate of how long it would take was completely off. Not because they are bad at their job, because the internal time sense that most planning systems assume is that you have the ability to because the internal time sense that most planning systems assume is that you have, that is a weird sentence. What is actually happening? The person did not feel the Wednesday urgency because Friday was still not now. By Thursday morning, it's shifted into the now. They work intensely. Actually, they probably worked really freaking hard. And their brain's estimate of how long it would take was completely off. Not because they're bad at their job, because the internal time sense that most planning systems assume you have was not operating accurately. The person who submits at 11:58 a.m. is not someone who started too late. They are often someone who started later than they should have because they could not feel the deadline coming. And then they worked until they ran out of time. That is a very different problem than laziness. It requires a different type of solution. Number 3, the chronic overcommitter. They said yes to things that they genuinely believe they can do. They are not managing you, they are giving you their honest assessment of their capacity. And their honest assessment is, quite frankly, wrong. Because estimating future time is an executive functioning task. It requires your brain to project forward and compute how long things take. What else will be in the schedule? What unknowns could appear? And for a brain where future time is not now, which is the nature of time perception differences, that calculation runs on optimism and intention instead of reality. They said yes to 5 things on Monday, and then they genuinely believed that they could complete all of them by Friday. By Wednesday, they see 2 of them are not going to happen. By Friday, they are apologizing, burning out, and wondering what in the world is wrong with them. This is not a motivation problem. That is a brain architecture problem. The solution is not to push harder. The solution is to build external systems that do the estimation their brain is not actually accurately doing on its own. We're going to get into exactly those systems. Let's talk about what all of this actually costs you. Because if I cannot connect this to the real numbers involved with your organization, the conversation absolutely does not get prioritized, even with yourself. 73.2% of people find constant interruptions one of the top sources of overwhelm in the workplace. And 63% of employees report that they need at least 10 minutes to get back on track once they've been interrupted, with the average needing 20 minutes. 20 minutes to refocus after a single interruption. Now factor in that 43% of your waking behaviors are habitual. Now factor in that 43% of your waking behaviors are habitual. If nearly half of your team's day is running on autopilot and you keep interrupting them with unsolicited or unscheduled, I should say, demands, surprise messages, priority shifts, or last-minute meetings, you are not just losing focus time. You are wearing down the executive functioning resources your team needs to do the parts of their job that require actual thinking. You are making their work a lot more challenging, is basically what that boils down to, and that has a real dollar value associated with it. And this is before you even account for time perception differences layered on top of that. Okay, so what does this look like in practice? Maybe a team is running late, submitting things last minute, mismanaging timelines. The team is not underperforming because of character or lack of motivation. They are operating inside of a schedule that doesn't account for how their brains actually process time. Meetings stacked back to back with no transition. Even if they are physically in the same room. The brain needs time to shift from the previous topic to the new one. And when that time does not exist, people show up to the next meeting already behind. Deadline stated as a day rather than a day and a time assumes people can feel the urgency of a Friday on Tuesday afternoon. Many of them absolutely can't. This is not a ADHD issue. It is a human challenge. Thursday is as far away as next month until it's suddenly Thursday. These are not soft issues. These are structural failures in how work is designed. And leaders have more control over these structures than they often realize they do. That is what we are building toward. Let me show you some things first. I want to show you something before we get into systems. This is my greenhouse, and I want to talk about what growing things has taught me about time. When you grow something, whether it is a tomato plant or a seedling or anything that starts as a seed, you quickly learn that you do not get to decide when it is ready. You do not get to hurry it. You do not get to tell it that you need it to be ready last week. That plant grows in its own time. What you control is not the pace. You control the conditions. You can control the light, the temperature, when it gets water, how much, whether the soil has what it needs, whether there are supports in place so it does not all fall over when it gets heavy. That is your job, not to speed up the growth, to build the environment where growth is possible. I think about this a lot when I think about teams and time, because the leaders I work with, they are not trying to create friction. They're not trying to make things harder. They are genuinely wanting their teams to grow and succeed. But sometimes they're trying to force the timelines instead of building the conditions. They are pulling on the plant instead of checking whether the soil is right. Time perception differences on your team are not something that you fix. They are something you build conditions around. You create the right light. You set up the right supports. You stop waiting for the plant to adapt to the wrong environment, and you change the environment instead. This is what the rest of the episode is about. Okay, tools. This is one of my favorite segments because I do not want to just tell you what to do. I want to show you what I actually use. Tools come third in the process. People come first, systems come second. What I am showing you today is not a fix. Do not get that wrong. It is external scaffolding into your system. It builds outside of your brain the structure your brain is not building internally. So your brain does not have to do it. This is the job of a good tool, period. It's not smarter than you. It is doing the work your executive functioning is already too depleted to do consistently. Tool number 1. The visual timer. The visual timer. Tool 1, the visual timer. Not all timers work the same way for brains with time perception differences. I want to be specific about why that is. Here's what I have. This is a physical timer, the kind with numbers around the edge. You turn it on its side, and whichever number faces up is what it counts down to. I can set it without looking at a digital display ticking down from 12 until 11:59, 11:58, and that distinction matters. For brains with time perception differences, watching a countdown clock does not create a felt sense of urgency the way it might for a neurotypical brain. The numbers move, the internal pressure does not necessarily build. What actually helps is a tangible, visible representation of time that you can glance at and physically see how much time is left, which is more concrete than a number decreasing on a screen. I use this when I'm working on something I need to start and stop at a specific time. I set at how long I have before my next commitment. I set how long I have before my next commitment. It sits on my desk. I glance at it. And my brain does not have to do the time math. The timer is doing it for me. That is the whole point. Tool number 2, phone automations by schedule and location. I talk about this in a previous episode, and I want to show you the specific setup because this has been one of the highest impact changes I have made for my own time perception. The problem I had was the problem the average blip, the problem. The average person picks up their phone 150 times per day. For a brain with time perception differences, those one of those pickups can cost 20 minutes because you lose track of time almost instantly. You go into scrolling mode, you go on TikTok, you go on LinkedIn, you go into your email, the pit of email. You went in to check the weather initially. You came out 25 or 2 hours later, and you still do not know what the weather is. So I built automations that set up when my phone. So I built automations that change what my phone is able to do based on time and location without me having to make a decision in the moment. That was a game changer for me because in the moment decision making is executive functioning. And I want to protect that resource for what actually needs the executive functioning, especially for work or day-to-day decisions. Schedule based. During my work hours, my apps get restricted automatically. The weather comes to me as a automation through Zapier, and one notification, one click, I get the information that I need and I'm out. Not in the app, nowhere near any scrolling. Location-based options. Location-based automations. I have a perimeter set around my neighborhood. When I'm within it, my phone shifts automatically to personal mode. Work notifications go quiet. Only personal contacts can reach me. The decision was made at setup time, not in the moment when my executive functioning is already really depleted. Setup time decisions protect me in setup time setup time decisions protect me indefinitely. In the moment decisions tax me and probably you every single time. Tool number 3, calendar blocking with built-in transition times. This right here is a system level tool that organizes. This is a systems level organiza- This is the systems level organizations have that most. This is the systems level tool that organizations have the most control over. Most organizational calendars stack meetings end to end, back to back, all the time. One ends, then the next one starts. There's no buffer in between. One ends at 11, the next starts at 11:15. That schedule assumes that people can teleport between contexts. Newsflash, we cannot. For brains with time perception differences, the end of a meeting is a transition, and a transition takes time. What a transition actually needs is time to write down what just happened, time to close out the previous context, time to locate materials for the next meeting, time to physically move if you need to, or digitally move to a different platform. And most importantly, time for your nervous system to settle down before the next demand arrives. For me, that minimum is 10 minutes. For many people, it might be 15. A good calendar blocking looks like meetings that end 5 minutes to 10 minutes before the next one starts. Your default meeting length could be 45 to 50 minutes instead of the default of 60 minutes. Maybe you end 5 minutes early as a rule to have that go into standard practice. Those 5 to 10 minutes are not wasted. That is how the previous meeting gets retained, and that is how the next meeting gets a person who is actually present and not writing down the task list that they are trying to remember from the previous meeting. All right, tool number 4, my favorite, the I Work Best When worksheet and where to get it. I've talked about the I Work Best When exercise before. This is not new, and I want to make it easy for you to actually get. So I'm going to share a QR code right on the screen. You can scan it now, and it will take you directly to a free download. 5 sections, 1 page. You can fill it out yourself in about 15 to 30 minutes, depending on how detailed you get. Or you could run it through your whole team for 30 to 45 minutes. It covers your work domains, what conditions you need for each domain to be successful, and the part that most people skip, what derails you. And finally, what helps you recover and how to communicate your needs at work, specifically how to communicate them to yourself and to others. That last section is the one that changes the room that you're in. When people write down what they actually need and share it with their team, the guessing stops. The grace starts. The productivity begins. And that 30 minutes, 45, if you really need to push it, will tell you more about how to support yourself and the people around you at work than an entire year of performance reviews. I said what I said. All right. Individual systems are a single piece. They're just one piece. Here's what leaders can do at the team and organization level to build environments that work with time perception differences instead of fighting them. Because 15 to 20% of your workforce is neurodivergent. And most estimates put it right around there. You're leading people whose internal clocks are running differently than the schedule your organization was built around. You can manage behavior until you're exhausted, or you can design an environment differently. I strongly recommend the environment. Leader System 1. Change how you state deadlines. Thursday is not a deadline. Thursday by 3 p.m. Eastern is a deadline. For a brain with time perception differences, a deadline of Thursday activates a somewhat intermediate point when Thursday starts to feel like now. This could be Wednesday night, it could be Thursday morning, it could be Thursday at 4:45 p.m. A deadline of Thursday by 3 gives the brain something specific to work backward from. It removes the ambiguity that causes you to have a conversation on Friday about where the deliverable is, because you both had a different definition of what Thursday meant, and a time zone if your team is distributed. And whenever possible, add one intermediate checkpoint, not micromanagement, a checkpoint. By Tuesday, let me know where you are on this. That gives a person a now that arrives before the deadline, which means you both have time to course correct if the estimate was completely out. Leader system number 2, build transition time into every meeting schedule. Stop scheduling back-to-back meetings. This is the full instruction. I know some of you that is out of your control. I get it. I was in and around corporate for around 20 years. The part that is in your control, protect it. Set your default meeting length to 50 minutes instead of 60. End meetings 5 minutes early as a standard practice. Build 15-minute buffers after any meeting that requires significant cognitive handoff, a strategy discussion, a feedback conversation, a client call. Those 15 minutes are not wasted time. For a brain with time perception differences, those 15 minutes are when the previous meeting gets integrated. Notes are written. The brain has a chance to locate itself in a day before the next thing starts. Without those buffers, the next meeting gets a version of your team that is not its A game. That is not at the level you know that they can perform at. This is not their fault. It is a calendar design flaw. Leader system number 3, use the 3 Ps for every meeting agenda. I mentioned the 3 Ps in most of my client discussions, especially when we're talking about time perception differences or somebody with a really packed schedule. The 3 Ps are purpose, process, payoff. These are important because they are incredibly underused, and it gives people an understanding, especially people with time perception differences, ways to anchor into a meeting. Purpose is, why are we here? What specific problem are we solving? Or what decision are we wanting to make in this meeting? Not a vague topic, a specific purpose. Purpose. Why are we here? What specific problem are we looking to solve? Or maybe there's a decision that we are wanting to make in this specific conversation. We're not looking for vague topics. You want specific. Process is the second P. How are we going to run this meeting? What is the agenda? Who speaks when? How are we making decisions? This is the piece most leaders and people who schedule meetings skip. And it is the piece that lets the brain with time perception differences know what comes next, which is how they stay present instead of drifting into not now. If you don't have this there, somebody who might have time perception differences or might just be stressed are going to be in perpetual waiting mode for when they're supposed to speak and not sure when that's supposed to happen. The last P, number 3, is payoff. What are we leaving with? What will be true at the end of this meeting that is not true now? What is the decision you are looking to make? A list of next steps. Clarify on one question. Clarity on one question. You want something concrete here for the payoff. When those 3 things are stated at the start, brains with time perception differences can orient themselves. They know the shape of the time they're in. They know what done looks like, which is key. And that is the same principle from previous episodes applied to meeting design. Make done visible before you start. That is how you get people present for all of it. Let's close this episode with this. Time perception differences are not a flaw. They are not disrespect. They are not poor planning. They are a neurological reality that shows up in a way certain brains process time, and they have been showing up in your team and possibly in you. It's been showing up in ways that have been getting labeled as a motivation problem or a character problem, even engagement problems. They are system problems, and system problems have system solutions. So this week, 3 things. Pick one external anchor and set it up today. A visual timer, a phone automation, 15 minutes before your alarm for your most important commitment this week. Pick one thing that lives outside of your brain and gives you a signal to transition before it even arrives. If you are a leader, look at the calendar this week and find one back-to-back situation that you can change. Just one. Maybe it's adding 15-minute buffer before or after a meeting. Pick one change this week. And the next deadline you assign, add the time to it. Not just Friday by noon. Do it for 1 week and watch what changes. That's enough. Start there. Before I go, 2 things on the screen for you. First is the free I Work Best When worksheet. Scan this code, download it, fill it out this week. It takes 15-30 minutes, and it will tell you more about how you actually work than most productivity systems have ever tried. The second is neurodivergentventures.com, where you can learn more about what I do with leaders and organizations. Reach out and work together, or just find your way to this show. Here's something to think about before the next episode. Change is coming for us all right now. AI rollouts, restructuring, new processes, team transitions, and there is a specific moment in almost every change initiative where things start to basically fall apart. Not at launch, not at the announcement, right around week 3 or 4, when enthusiasm starts to wear off and resistance starts to settle in. There's a reason this happens. And there is a framework I use with every organization I work with that addresses this specifically and gives you tools to move through it. Next episode, we're going to go over the SHIFT framework, how to lead change conversations so the friction comes up early where you can actually do something about it, instead of going underground where it quietly kills an initiative. Thank you for joining me on Leadership Brains, right here on Executive Functioning TV. You can reach out to me at neurodivergentventures.com, and I'll put it right here on the screen. Support your brain, support your team's brain, and I will see you next episode. Leadership Brains is sponsored by Neurodivergent Ventures, where your unique mind is your greatest asset. Coming up next on Leadership Brains. So there are lots of different planners out there, and I am under no illusion as somebody with ADHD that I could grab another planner, and the fundamental belief that a planner is going to change your life is not lost on me. And as somebody with ADHD, I'm very guilty of buying a new planner with the hopes that it will change my life. It is a wonderful tool, and it's exactly that, a tool. A planner, a piece of paper, a physical planner, a OneNote that is organized is a tool. So you focus on learning and figuring out the tool that works best for you. I always say, as I did before, start with pen and paper first. First things first, what I want you to do is we're going to write weekly review on the top. So we're going to do essentially kind of like a weekly wrap up and a weekly recap with ideas and what's working, what's not. So we'll dive into that. So I'm going to write weekly review, and I'm going to write for the dates. First things first, I want to write down 3 to 5 wins that I've had over the past week. So 3 to 5 wins. This week, I was able to, I had a client graduate from coaching, which was fantastic. So they were able to finish some of the goals that they came into coaching for and felt confident in their skills where they could go off and really do it on their own for a while. Client graduate. I spent some time in the garden, which was one of my goals. Time in garden. And from there, the other part I did is I was able to spend some quality time with my kiddo. That's definitely always a win for me. Time with the kiddo. So once you have 3 to 5 wins, we're going to move on to a weekly top 3 review. And what that does is however many top priorities you have for the week, I recommend limiting it to 3 to 4 maximum, because if we have too many top priorities, it gets distracting and we don't feel like we're making the momentum that we know that we can. So if you have very specific areas of focus and places that you can make momentum, that's where they want to live. So I will document my top 3 that I had this week. Had a lot of momentum with some clients. After you do that reflection, here's the part where your executive functioning really shines. We're going to do a reflection where we ask ourselves questions on what is working, what's not working, what we want to continue. This is a core part of executive functioning exercises. This is where you learn what's working for you and what's not. Most people skip this step. That reflection, people say like, I don't need it. It takes up too much time. The reality, though, is that if you skip these steps, it actually makes it harder for you to be able to improve over time. So first question I want you to answer, over this past week, what worked? So I'm going to write in what worked this week. And then the next question is, what did not work for me this week? I can tell you right now what did not work for me this week. What did not work this week? What did not work for me this week is I did not make plans to go to the gym and I never made it to the gym, and that shows. No gym plans. Okay, that's a challenge. From here, I think about what did work for me this week is I set limits on what I could actually achieve. Set boundaries on what I could achieve. That worked well for me. Could achieve. Okay. What I usually say is think about 2 to 3 for each question. From here, what we do is we go into something called a task sweep. This is where you take out your notebooks, your project management systems, and you look at what did you not complete this week? What is coming due next week? And what would you like to continue? So if you've got major projects that are still moving forward, you've got tasks that are due next week, we're going to go ahead and write that down. So I'm going to have the task sweep. And I'm going to put, these are the 3 things I want you to focus on. Calendar, review. You're going to look at what meetings are coming up. Is there any prep that you need to do, and a task associated with a meeting? You're going to review your project list and deadlines. And maybe even bills that need to be paid. Bills pay, question mark. And finally, just tasks that are still out there and that need a place to go. Okay, we're not going to walk through the whole task sweep in this video, but I think it's helpful to at least understand what that structure is. Now that we've gone through our calendar review, our project review, we know what worked and what doesn't. Now it's time to do something to set your top 3 priorities for the week. Top 3, moving forward. I choose 3. Full Focus talks about 3. Other planners talk about 3. The power of 3. Why 3, Kristina? I have 3 for work and 3 for personal. I'm of the mindset that when you have top 3 as a whole, that helps you focus on the area of your life that's important to you that week. There might be some weeks where your top 3 are 2 for yourself or your family and then 1 for work. Or you might have all 3 for work this week because you're traveling or it's just a really heavy week. And what that does is it helps you start to set realistic expectations, which is organization and planning, executive functioning skills, moving forward. So you can start to really think about what is doable for the week. So my top 3, I'm going to write 1, 2, 3. I'm going to be traveling this week, so I'm going to write traveling for number 3. I start at random points. I don't know why. Feels good. Traveling for the week. So that's going to be a big part of it. Another thing is I have a deadline for a writing project. And I am offboarding a contract because we finished the work, which feels really good. They saw some results, which is even better because we finished the contract. So offboarding for me, there's a lot of steps involved with that. So what I would do after this is I would look at my calendar and I'll start to outline, since I have that as a priority, I'll outline where that work can take place. It's very important that I tell you that this is not necessarily time blocking for me. What this is me thinking about realistically, can I get this work done in the time that I have? Because a lot of people think I've got so many meetings in a day. You might see your meeting calendar and it's just really heavy, or you drive a lot and you can't necessarily do tasks along the way. What you're trying to do is see what is actually realistic compared to your workload. So when you have your weekly review every week, the intention is for you to start to A, see momentum in your work every week, B, start to have realistic expectations about what you can achieve, and C or 3, whatever it is, you give yourself the space to succeed. So instead of saying, I have this big project due, I'm working on this project, which is super vague, you say, I do phase 1 of the project, which is research and outline. And that's all I'm doing this week.
That's what done looks like. Ultimately, if you take nothing away from this weekly review, it's being able to answer the question, what does done look like today? What does done look like this week? So when you review back for next week, did you hit that? If you didn't, why? What would you do to improve? Okay, so to recap, the weekly review supports your executive functioning skills across every single step. Reflection, planning, organization, as well as emotional regulation. Let me tell you why. Emotional regulation is something that people often shy away from, and they think that regulation means that they don't show emotion. It's actually the quite opposite. So it's being able to show a proportionate amount of emotion based on the situation so you don't over respond to something. And I'm one of the ADHDers that actually shows, I get very dysregulated when I'm excited about something new. And so I'm not necessarily the one that gets dysregulated when something bad happens. It's when stuff like really good, I get very dysregulated. So it's learning how to regulate throughout my day and my week. And I start off the week with a plan in place, and I can get excited about stuff because I know it's coming. And I'm not just getting excited and overwhelmed in the moment. So I can see it coming, I can get excited over time, and it helps me regulate. Regulation also comes into effect when you're identifying your wins, you're creating a plan, you're giving yourself space to say, you know what? Priorities this week shifted. I know that I have to put down certain things, and you have a plan already in place, so you know what to pick from. You don't have to start from zero. So that's the benefits of the weekly review as well as the executive functioning skills. I'm Kristina. Thank you for being on Leadership Brains, and I hope you have a wonderful week, and let me know how your planning goes.
Learning to be okay with the messy middle is a process. So I'm Kristina. I am a coach that helps people move from strategy to execution faster. I have a background in corporate. I lived and breathed it. I wanted that corporate lifestyle for so long, and I got it for a very long time. I went into entrepreneurship for many reasons, most of which I wanted to serve and work with neurodivergent brains. I myself have ADHD and dyslexia and was late diagnosed ADHD, as most women are. And when we think about the messy middle, we often think of a trope, the type of person who doesn't have their act together, that things are just always, in a state of chaos. I want to put a different spin on this. I want to say that, yes, while there are people who are in constant chaos, absolutely, that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about the people who are not afraid to take action, even when it is hard, even when it is really challenging and looks weird and it's uncomfortable. When things look uncomfortable, people criticize, especially when it's stuff that they see somebody else that is extremely successful, and they compare you to them, and you yourself start to compare yourself to them. You might be on chapter 2 of your book, of your path in entrepreneurship. They might be on chapter 87. Period. They might have been doing it a shorter period of time, but had capital. They might have been doing it for 20 years part-time and recently quit their job in the past 2 years and have gone all in, and you had no clue that they had a full-time job on top of all of this. You might be taking care of people and not able to pay attention to your full-time entrepreneur, business owner journey 60 hours out of the week like they are. Everybody's journey is different. What is and will set you apart is embracing the messy middle you're in. I myself am in the messy middle of restructuring my business in a way that is more sustainable to where my life is right now, which is in a space where I want to have more flexibility in my schedule so that I can be more creative in the work that I'm doing with my clients. And so I need mental space to do that. Like I can't be creative on an immediate response. So I've been redoing my schedule because of it. I've changed some ways that people can book with me, and it's a little messy.
it's a little messy. And the other part of the messy middle for me is I've been implementing a lot of AI structure within my business when it comes to the Microsoft product suite. If you follow me, you know about this 8-week implementation I had. Y'all deserve an update on that because it's now been 12 weeks and it's been a ride. It has been messy. So a part of that messy middle for me is also trying new things like implementing Microsoft. And it's been messy. And most of my clients who utilize a lot of these AI tools and they're learning too look at me like, you're in this too? You're having this challenge too? Because when you talk about and hold space for the messy middle, other people will look at you and say, I'm not alone in this. And you get to look at them and say, you are absolutely not. Visibility during the messy middle can make us relatable, can make us accessible, and can really show people the humanity that we are, because they are so fixated, and I'm guilty of this, and I'm sure you are too, of the people who have already made it. Show your messy middle. Be vulnerable with people that deserve that vulnerability, and show up for yourself. You'll thank yourself later. If there's one piece of advice I would give a leader who is looking to figure out what type of professional development they're wanting to give their team, invest in their executive functioning skills. That is so underrated and so challenged, because I've seen time and time again recently, especially, where the owner of an organization has invested in very specific niche training, which has value. And if your team has challenges with planning and prioritizing, time management, emotional regulation challenges, not able to keep the cool all the time. It's okay to have emotion. It's not okay to be completely dysregulated at work all the time. It's not good for you, it's not good for the organization. Working memory challenges, trouble with processing. There's a lot of aspects of executive functioning that people think are innate, and actually scientists found that it is not completely innate. Executive functioning skills happen in the prefrontal cortex of your brain. This is the last part of your brain that fully develops. Impulse control, emotional regulation. Think about your teenage years and how much more impulsive you were, or even early 20s, because your prefrontal cortex, your frontal lobe, does not completely fully develop until you're 25. And I recently heard that they had that number from old data based on when funding was done. So I need to go back and check that out. So if you are looking to figure out how to support your team in for the long term, for your organization, but also for their own professional development, look into executive functioning training. It's not just about learning how to time block and time manage. It's also learning how you work and helping people define what that looks like. And it's like, well, Kristina, what if they define how they work and they realize that I don't have a way to fit within that? Great, now they know. That doesn't mean they quit. It doesn't mean you completely change as an employer. It could mean that you make some changes, but what it does tell them is that their expectations of when they go to work and what they need aren't the same. So they do something called self-accommodation, and I'll give you an example. One of my clients, super brilliant, and their emotional regulation is not great. We've been working on it. They've also been working for a therapist. There's underlying reasons why their emotional regulation is not great. There's things that we can do in executive functioning work that help support it. One of the ways that we do that is prioritizing fun outside of work, self-care outside of work, and regulation prior to arriving at work. If you are somebody that struggles with prioritization, planning, organizational skills, as well as emotional regulation, or just one of those, acknowledging and supporting yourself before you get into the office is paramount. It is like step one. So if you don't know how to support yourself prior to stepping through that office door, it is going to make for one hell of a day. And that is the power of executive functioning, is working on how you work best. If you are interested in this work, I talk a lot about this on all of my channels, on LinkedIn, on YouTube, on TikTok. I have a new show that's called Leadership Brains. It is on the Executive Functioning TV app, exclusively on Roku. So if you are interested in this, this is what I do all day, every day. This is actually what I'm doing with a current
organization that is investing in their team. They want this investment of executive functioning training before they go and do the very intense 12-month training that they have coming up. So they're talking to me before they do the 12-month training. That is the most productive way to ensure that they're creating systems for support for their staff so that they can absorb all of the very expensive training that is out there.